Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 142, and we're in week 27 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. So we have officially passed the 6-month mark. Wow. This week, we are covering chapters 51 through 53, and I'm calling this episode Betrayal and Blame. Roger found himself a prisoner. He was concussed and battered. He forcibly traveled with the Tuscarora for more than a week. He escaped, hoping they would not pursue him. He found a stone circle. He was recaptured. Brianna was at River Run until her parents returned. She was angry and distant from Jamie. She fell into the rhythm of River Run, and Aunt Jocasta loved her company. She and Claire had a difficult goodbye. Jamie offered his promise before they left to find Roger. Claire was reunited with a familiar face. Young Ian had a heart-to-heart with Claire. The Tuscarora pointed them north to a Mohawk village. Jamie and Claire finally made peace with each other and themselves. They reached Snaketown and hoped to find Roger and secure his release. Inside the chapters, Part 11, Pas du tout, which means not at all in French. Chapter 51, Betrayal, October 1769. Roger woke with vomit in his hair, thinking he was on the Gloriana. He was tied up in pain and vomited again. He was on the back of a horse, lying across it on his belly. His captors took him off the horse, and he fell face first into the leaves. He grappled with memory to figure out where he was and what had happened. The pain in his head and his body was excruciating. Then he remembered. Indians. Where was he, though? His memories swirled. He remembered the Gloriana and Bonnet, then Brianna and the handfasting. A face like Brianna's came into his mind, but it was fleeting when one of the Indian men grabbed him. Roger thought the Indian meant him harm, and he fought. The man had meant to loosen Roger's hands, not hurt him. He was in the mountains with 4 Indian men, 4 Tuscarora. He drank from a nearby brook. His teeth were loose, there were cuts in his mouth and upon his chapped lips. A jolt of memory. Claire, Brianna, and Jamie Fraser. He had been at Fraser's Ridge. The face of Jamie seared in his mind. He remembered it now. The meeting, the fight, and how Jamie and the other man had meant to kill him. He thought they had given him to the Indians, but to what end? As he stood and relieved himself, he couldn't look at the men around the fire because it filled him with rage. "Wait for me, bugger," he said under his breath. "Both of you. Wait for me. I'm coming back." As he shared dinner with the Tuscarora, he tried to speak with them in various languages, but they responded to none of them. When it was time to sleep, they tied him with a noose around neck and feet. He had a little room to move before he would choke himself. He slept restlessly as his dreams were filled with violence. The next morning, they left the camp. Roger walked with the noose around his neck and wrists tied to the horse's harness. He thought they headed north and couldn't have traveled very far from Fraser's Ridge. He memorized landmarks so he could come back this way after he escaped. Days were passing as if in a trance, so Roger made a small knot in his coat for each day. He was going back to Fraser's Ridge, no matter what it took. He found his opportunity to escape on day 8. He cut his hands free and ran. They called after him, but he didn't stop. He saw them and kept going. He was terrified when he found cover. He had no idea what direction he had come. His foot was bleeding from a gash in it. He made a makeshift bandage. He found a place to rest. He slept. When Roger woke, he was hungry and thirsty. Surely they didn't follow him. He picked a direction and went. He cautiously listened for pursuit. Roger scrabbled around a rock face, and in the clearing in front of him was another set of standing stones. He couldn't hear them and tried to remember what the date could be. As close as he could figure it, had to be near to just past Samhain or just before. He didn't know if this circle worked on the same dates as Craigna done. He had the gems in his pocket, and if they were open, he could escape. He struggled with the thought of abandoning Brianna. Could he leave her behind? He decided if he wasn't going to step through the stones, then he had to go back to hidden safety or climb at the cliff face. When he looked up, a face was looking down, and a noose settled around his neck again. Poor Roger. He has a concussion, loose teeth, cuts, bruises, scrapes, and was a prisoner of the Tuscarora. Even though he escaped, he gashed his foot and was caught again. Even though his attempt was foiled, he found a stone circle. That might serve for future purposes. Chapter 52, Desertion, River Run, December 1769. So now roughly a month has passed or so, right? We don't know if it was the end of October. This could be the beginning of December, so it's a month. Or this could be 6 weeks later. We don't know how long it took them to get from the ridge down to River Run and then get all their supplies together. But I'm thinking it probably took them about a month to get there. So we were looking somewhere around the 1st of December, maybe. I was having a hard time tracking the dates. I'll see if I can figure it out a little better. Brianna stood outside of Hector Cameron's tomb. The inscription read, Semper Fidelis. Had he been a faithful man, and to whom? She and Jamie hadn't spoken to each other since that terrible day. Brianna had screamed at him in her final words of rage, and he had left the cabin and not returned that night. She wanted to follow him and comfort him even in her anger, but she blamed him for that too. Brianna hadn't slept that night after wrangling her emotions into a tightly sealed box inside of her. In the early morning, Jamie had returned and called for Claire to come out. They brought her to River Run to be safe as they planned on going after Roger. It was winter, and not safe for her to travel to the mountains or to stay at the ridge on her own. She thought she might have had a chance at getting her mother to agree, but not with his stubbornness supporting her. She replayed the fight in her mind, his reproach of her. Your honor? She had said incredulously. Your honor? Your fucking notion of honor is what caused all the trouble in the first place. You will not use that sort of language to me. Though, if it's fucking we're speaking of, I'll fucking well say anything I want, she bellowed and slammed a fist on the table, rattling the dishes. She had, too. So had he. Her mother had tried once or twice to stop them. Brianna flinched at the belated memory of the distress in Claire's deep golden eyes, but neither of them had paid a moment's notice, too intent on the savagery of their mutual betrayal. She missed Frank, and thought if he hadn't died, none of this would have happened. But her father was gone, replaced by a violent stranger, a man who had her face, but could not understand her heart. A man who had taken both family and home from her, and not satisfied with that, had taken love and safety too, leaving her bereft in this strange, harsh land. She had kissed her mother goodbye and vowed to wait in the garden until she knew they were gone. She didn't want to see him. He found her regardless of her desire. "Brianna," he said quietly behind her. She didn't answer, didn't move. He made a small snorting noise. "Anger? Impatience? I have a thing to say to you." "Say it," she said, and the words hurt her throat, as though she'd swallowed some jagged object. It was beginning to rain again. Fresh spatters slicked the marble in front of her, and she could feel the icy pat of drops that struck through her hair. "I will bring him home to you," Jamie Fraser said, still quiet, "or I will not come back myself." She couldn't bring herself to turn around. There was a small sound, a click on the pavement behind her, and then the sound of his footsteps going away. Before her tear-blurred eyes, the drops on the marble roses gathered weight and began to fall. When at last she turned around, the brick-lined walk was empty. At her feet was a folded paper damp with rain, weighted with a stone. She picked it up and held it crumpled in her hand, afraid to open it. She's just as stubborn as the Frasers all are. She definitely has it. Seems like they all have quite a bit of processing to do and some sort of reclamation, forgiveness, etc. after that big fight and then when the truth came out. February 1770. So now another 2 months has gone by, roughly. Brianna became accustomed to daily life at River Run. She even found ways to use her talents in drawing. It felt luxurious. A servant prepared the bath for her while she was still in bed. She would feel guilty about being waited on by slaves later. That sounds flippant. Brianna's not really flippant about it. It's just in this moment. She rolled over in bed and took inventory of her body to ensure that it didn't become a stranger to herself. The baby within her greeted her with a stretch and movement. She took off her flannel nightgown, feeling every part of her body. She lay back and heard the noises of the household waking up around her. The sound of Frank on the weekends or Jamie speaking outside the cabin to the horses used to make her feel safe and protected. She didn't feel this way any longer. She was the protector now and didn't need anyone to make her feel safe. It was her job. She stood by the window looking out and listening to her body. She could almost hear the baby's heartbeat and feel it separate from hers. No matter what happened, she would never be alone. Brianna is a Fraser through and through, stubborn, ill-tempered. She can hold a grudge with the best of them. How do you think the word desertion applies to this chapter? I am unsure and have many thoughts running through my mind. Had she deserted Jamie? She hadn't deserted Roger. Had Jamie deserted her? Had Frank deserted her? Had Claire deserted them both? That's a pretty loaded word. I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are on this, absolutely. And it's interesting the way that she talks about the pregnancy. It seems that Claire's influence is definitely on her. But I also wonder, because she can travel through the stones like her mother, if she has some of that innate gifting like her mother has, and that Master Raymond helped her develop more fully. Is it already there? I think so. Chapter 53, Blame. They arrived at Tanago, a Tuscaroran village. Jamie barely spoke since they left Fraser's Ridge. She felt guilty, worried, and pained. The issue of blame was on her mind. She thought Jamie blamed her for not telling him the truth about Bonnet. Claire blamed herself for it. On the journey to the village, they slept separately when they camped at night. They had brought whiskey with them, a king's ransom, Claire thought. It had to be enough to trade for one Scotsman. Claire hoped Roger had been there, but Jamie had told young Ian to be sure Roger would never come back. This was likely too close. Claire had brought the amulet, an opal. The amulet to return to someone, and the opal to supplement trade if needed. Jamie also brought along every small belonging he might use to up the trade except for his father's ring. The ring had been left with Brianna in case they didn't return. Having the ring gave Brianna a travel insurance policy of sorts. She could get back to her own time if needed. Claire replayed the last moment she'd had with Brianna at River Run in her mind. Brianna trusted Claire to find Roger, but was unsure about Jamie's intentions. Claire knew Jamie would do anything to find Roger and bring him back to her. His honor wouldn't allow otherwise. His honor. These words brought more words from Brianna. His honor, she said flatly. That's what matters. I guess it's all right, though. As long as it makes him get Roger back. She turned away, bending her head against the wind. Brianna, I said, but she only hunched her shoulders, pulling the shawl tight around them. It was time to leave as young Ian called for Claire. Claire and Brianna had an emotional goodbye. Come back, she whispered. Oh, Mama, come back safe. I can't leave you, Brie. I can't. I held her tight, all strong bone and tender flesh, the child I had left, the child I had regained, and the woman who now put my arms away from her and stood straight, alone. You have to go, she whispered. The mask of indifference had fallen and her cheeks were wet. She glanced over my shoulder at the archway to the stable yard. Bring him back. You're the only one who can bring him back. She kissed me quickly, turned and ran. The sound of her steps ringing on the brick path. Claire urged Jamie to talk to Brianna. He needed to say goodbye. Jamie went and returned within a few minutes. They were all mounted and left River Run. It was night, and Jamie was still with Incognito. Young Ian came in with someone behind him. He had brought Polly Ann, the ex-slave woman they had freed and taken to the Indians to live. She had a child on her arm. Young Ian translated, and Claire learned that Tuscarora had taken her in as their own. She took a husband, and the baby was born a few months earlier. Polly Ann was free and happy. Claire wanted young Ian to ask who she should give Nyaweni's amulet to. Polly Ann said no one would want it. She says they will not want it, Auntie, Ian translated. It is the medicine bundle of a shaman, and it's dangerous. It should have been buried with the person to whom it belonged. No one here will touch it, for fear of attracting the shaman's ghost. Ask her, what if the shaman wasn't buried, if the body couldn't be found? Polly Ann's round face was solemn, listening. She shook her head when Ian had finished and replied, She says that to that case the ghost walks with you, Auntie. She says you should not show it to anyone here. They will be frightened. Polly Ann wasn't frightened by the amulet and the ghost of Nyaweni because of her past spiritual beliefs before becoming an Indian. Claire was comforted by the idea of Nyaweni walking with her. They talked until Jamie's return surprised them. She said her goodbyes and said something to young Ian in a parting word. She says I should tell Uncle Jamie that the night the woman died in the sawmill, she saw a man. What man? He shook his head, still frowning. She didn't ken him, only that he was a white man, heavy and square, not so tall as Uncle or I. She saw him come out of the mill and walk into the forest. She was sitting in the door to her hut in the dark, so she thinks he did not see her. But he passed close enough to the fire that she saw his face. She says he was pockmarked. Here he put his fingertips against his face as she had, with the face like a pig. Murchison! My heart skipped a beat. Did the man wear a uniform? Jamie asked, frowning. No. But she was curious to know what he had been doing there. He was not one of the plantation owners, nor yet a hand or an overseer, so she crept to the mill to see. When she put her head inside, she knew something evil had happened. She said they smelt blood, and then she heard no voices, so she did not go in. Yep, remember that night, everybody? That's why she's an ex-slave, because they had to take her away because Murchison was hunting somebody down. Jamie and Claire barely missed preventing the death of the young woman in the sawmill. Jamie touched Claire and she took his hand. It had been almost a month since they touched purposely. Murchison had a wife in England, and a pregnant mistress would not have been desirable. Jamie thought he might visit the sergeant alone when they returned to River Run. Claire had a sharp response. Don't you think you've enough vengeance to keep you occupied for the moment? I spoke more sharply than I intended, and his hand slipped abruptly out of mine. I expect so, he said, both face and voice, without expression. Jamie went on to share what he had learned about Roger. He was given to the Mohawk, who were also called the Iroquois, and their native name is Kanyankahaka. Well, I say that as a very white American person. Kanyankahaka. But they are known by very many different names. Young Ian's friend, Anakara, would be their guide. Jamie went to their assigned cubicle in the longhouse. Claire went to go after him, but young Ian stopped her. Auntie, he said hesitantly, will you not forgive him? Forgive him? I stared at him. For what? For Roger? He grimaced. No, it was a grievous mistake, but we would do the same again, thinking matters as we did. No, for Bonnet. For Stephen Bonnet? How can he possibly think I blame him for that? I've never said such a thing to him. And I had been too busy thinking that he blamed me to even consider it. Ian scratched a hand through his hair. Well, do you not see, Auntie? He blames himself for it. He has ever since the man robbed us on the river, and now with what he's done to my cousin. He shrugged, looking mildly embarrassed. He's fair eaten up with it, and knowing that you're angry with him. But I'm not angry with him. I thought he was angry with me because I didn't tell him Bonnet's name right away. Ugh, Ian looked as though he didn't know whether to laugh or look distressed. Well, I dare say, it would have saved us a bit of trouble if you had, but no. I'm sure it's not that, Auntie. After all, by the time Cousin Brianna told you, we'd already met you, Mackenzie, on the mountainside and done him a bit of no good. I took in a deep breath and blew it out again. But you think he thinks I'm angry at him? Oh, anyone could see you are, Auntie, he assured me earnestly. You didn't look at him or speak to him save for what you must, and, he said, clearing his throat delicately, I haven't seen you go to his bed any time this month past. Well, he hasn't come to mine either, I said hotly, before reflecting that this was scarcely a suitable conversation to be having with a 17-year-old boy. Ian hunched his shoulders and gave me an owlish look. Well, He's his pride, hasn't he? God knows he has, I said, rubbing a hand over my face. Look, Ian, thank you for saying something to me. He gave me one of those rare, sweet smiles that transformed his long, homely face. Well, I do hate to see him suffer. I'm fond of Uncle Jamie, aye? So am I said, and swallowed the small lump in my throat. Good night, Ian. Quite the eye-opening conversation, and shows a level of maturity by young Ian to speak up. On her way back to their cubicle, Claire pondered what young Ian said. He was right, of course. Her guilt about the gold ring had kept her silent. Not Brianna's request. And why should I feel guilty over that? There was no sensible answer. It had been instinct, not conscious thought, to hide the ring. I had not wanted to show it to Jamie, to put it back on my finger in front of him. And yet I had needed to keep it. My heart squeezed small thinking of the past few weeks, of Jamie going grimly about the necessities of reparation and loneliness and guilt. That was why I had come with him after all, because I was afraid that if he went alone, he might not come back. Spurred by guilt and courage, he might go to reckless lengths with me to consider. I knew he would be careful. And all the time he had thought himself not only alone but bitterly reproached by the one person who could and should have offered him comfort. Eaten up with it, indeed. I think Claire needs to apologize for her part in it, and yes, he could have come to her and sought her out. Pride. It's an ugly thing. It really is. I guess gets us all in spots of trouble from here and there. I've known marriages that have absolutely dissolved because of an issue of pride. Because of waiting for the other person to be the first one. Yeah. We have to be careful with that. Once in their cubicle, she defrocked and climbed in next to Jamie, asking him to warm her. I do this very thing if I have been the distant partner, or if I think it'd be helpful for me to be the first one to engage. Almost exact words, which is really funny. 24 years, it seems to work to break the ice. She wanted to comfort him with her body and presence. She didn't care about herself in the wordless dark, but became as needful and desperate for him as he was for her. They were alone in the darkness, surrounded by others. She could hear things like the hum of bees. The small cubicle was their singular space. It was then they talked for the first time in almost a month. She apologized. He didn't blame Bonnet. He felt a failure as a man. He was jealous of a dead man. I had not thought ever to be so jealous of a dead man, he whispered at last. I shouldn't have thought it possible. Of a dead man? My own voice rose slightly with astonishment as it finally dawned on me. Of Frank? He lay still, half on top of me. His hands touched the bones of my face, hesitant. Who else? I have been worm-eaten with it all these days of writing. I see his face in my mind, waking and sleeping. You did say he looked like Jack Randall, no? I gathered him tight against myself, pressing his head down so that his ear was near my mouth. Thank God I hadn't mentioned the ring to him. But had my face, my traitorous, transparent face, somehow given away that I thought of it? How? I whispered to him, squeezing hard. How could you think such a thing? How could I not? He demanded. You heard her, Claire. You ken well what she said to me. Brianna? She said she would gladly to see me in hell and sell her own soul to have her father back. Her real father. He swallowed. I heard the sound of it above the murmur of distant voices. I keep thinking he would not have made such a mistake. He would have trusted her. He would have known that she... I keep thinking that Frank Randall was a better man than I am. She thinks so. His hand faltered, then settled on my shoulder, squeezing tight. I thought. Perhaps she felt the same, Sassenach. Fool, I whispered, and didn't mean him. I ran my hands down the slope of his back, digging my fingers into the firmness of his buttocks. Wee idiot, come here. I am. You didn't mind it so much, though? No. His hair smelt of smoke and pine sap. There were still bits of needles caught in it when pricked smooth and sharp against my lips. She didn't mean it. She did. I heard her. I heard you both. I rubbed slowly between his shoulder blades, feeling the faint traces of old scars, the thicker, the more recent welts left by the bear's claws. She's just like you. She'll say things in a temper she'd never say in cold blood. You didn't mean all the things you said to her, did you? No. I could feel the tightness in him lessening, the joints of his body loosening, yielding reluctantly to the persuasion of my fingers. No, I didn't mean it, not all of it. Neither did she. He wants to know if Brianna could forgive him if he brings Roger back to her. Claire says she will. Then it dawned on Claire. Brianna's words meant for Claire to bring Jamie back, not Roger. What do you think of that? It occurred to me for the first time that perhaps she hadn't been speaking of Roger. I find that interesting. I've always thought that, regardless of being angry at him, she wanted Claire to go with Jamie to make sure he would come back and she wouldn't lose another father. Interesting to debate. The traveling north was difficult, and some days it was impossible. They finally arrived at the Mohawk village of Snaketown in mid-February. So at this point in the story, we're caught up with where Brianna is at River Run, after she's settled in and gotten used to her role there. Brianna would be 6 months pregnant by now. Claire hoped Roger was here, and they could leave quickly after negotiating his release, so they could be back well before Brianna was due to deliver. Claire worried he wasn't here or was dead. Their guide refused to go into the village with them. Jamie paid him with a horse, a knife, and a flask of whiskey. The rest of the whiskey was buried for later retrieval. Claire asked if the Mohawk would understand what they wanted. Young Ian said the Tuscarora and the Mohawk languages were similar, as were Spanish and Italian. They likely had a bit of English as well. Off they went into the village. So what do you think of that whole section about Claire feeling guilty because she wanted that ring? And that's why she didn't tell Jamie, not really because of Brianna. And what do you think about Jamie feeling like he wasn't as good of a man as Frank? He's not known to be an insecure man, but guess what? He's never been able to be a father either. William was being raised by John, and Faith was born and died too early. And he's never had to be a father. He's never had to compete with another man to be the father, because even though Lord John is raising William, William's his son. Jamie can't be in the picture at all, right? So this is all challenging to me. I may have to ask some males in my life if that's the kind of leap they would make. Like that's where their brain would go. And the fact that young Ian said, well, given the same information, we'd have done the same thing again. So it's not the fact that they nearly killed Roger and sent him away to the Tuscarora and then onto the Mohawk. That wasn't the problem at all. I'm like, oh, you still should have gotten more information than you had. And Ian's saying, oh, well, we'd already met Roger on the mountain. Well, that didn't matter. It had only been a matter of a day, right? It was quick. It wasn't as if weeks had gone by. They could have gone after them and caught up to them before they got to the Mohawk village. So him saying that was a little bit flippant, and perhaps, even though he's extremely mature for 17 years old and has been through a lot in his life, and he's very capable, that is the thought processes of a 17-year-old male over what might be useful. I don't know. It's perplexing for me. I almost feel like there's not enough thoughtfulness on Jamie's part as to what he did. Like, he's worried. I don't know. It's confusing to me. So if he thinks that Frank is a better man because Frank would have trusted Brianna, well, does that mean that he would have gone to Brianna first and said, is there anything else to this story? I'm not sure that that's what he's saying here. I think instead he would have done the same things, but he wouldn't have called her a whore. He wouldn't have told her that she was making it up and that she was crying wolf. I think that's more of it. What do you guys think? This part's slightly confusing to me, even though I've read these books multiple times. I don't know if it's because of how I'm seeing it through my own lens. And if he was my dad, what I would want him to do, or what I think he should do based on his character. I don't know. I know I've said I don't know 20 times, but stick with me and I want to hear from you. So how can you let me know what you think? You can call the voice line at 719-425-9444 or drop an email at contact@adramavoutlander.com. And I do want to hear from you. I'm going to read to you a letter that came by email. And this letter is from Meredith, our friend from Everett, Washington. Dear Desiree, I really don't like the fight between Bree and Jamie. After he finds out the truth, he should have felt so guilty for doing what he and Ian did. All of this mess could have been avoided, you know. They knocked Roger out. Would it really have been such a bad idea to drag him into the cabin and ask Brianna when she got back if this was the man that raped her? I realized that Jamie thought he already had a confession from Roger, but still. Jamie simply doesn't get that Brianna has a right to deal with her rapist. Instead, he took that choice away from her. I also don't like his picking out a husband for Bree without ever bothering to consult his daughter. I think I understand why he does it. He himself admitted that he always pictured her as a baby despite the pictures. I think that Jamie can't deal with the fact that Brianna's an adult and that there isn't much parenting he can do for her. I also believe that he's trying to marry Brianna off has to do with Roger's origins rather than his absence. Roger's origins. What do you think? I'm not sure what that means, Meredith. Jamie claims he's trying to spare her and her child harm, but why couldn't they just have claimed that Brianna is a young widow and that her husband died on the voyage to America? I know that the character of Jamie is smart enough to have thought of that. So why is he so desperate to marry her off? Because Roger is from the future. He wants to keep Brianna since he lost her so many years, and Jamie doesn't want to lose his family to another historian in the future, any more than Roger wants to lose his love to Jamie the way Frank did. Oh, now I understand what you mean, his origins. There is a built-in rivalry between Jamie and Roger, regardless of this misunderstanding. Oh, that's pretty deep, Meredith. What do you guys think? Do you think that subconsciously that Jamie is against Roger because he's from the 20th century? And I find it fascinating that Jamie never, ever asked about Roger's family history. Like, don't Scots always ask about family history? I don't know. Thank you, Meredith. That was really thoughtful. And I need to, dig through that on my own a little bit. So we're building up. And it was interesting how these chapters were constructed, because we had the lead-up chapter that we saw from one vantage point, Roger's, right? And then we saw the next chapter that was from Brianna's vantage point, but it covered two different time periods. It covered the initial time that they were there before young Ian and Jamie and Claire left, and it covered that little section in February that mirrored where we left off with Jamie, Claire, and young Ian arriving at the Mohawk village of Snaketown. So that's an unusual construction that we don't normally see. And I love being able to see the facets of Brianna that are really like Jamie, that some are like Frank, and obviously some are like her mother. And I wonder if Claire really sees how much Brianna is like her. I don't know. She might. But Brianna brings it out in totally different ways. Like Claire deals with the body and surgery and healing, but the way that Brianna can draw and the way that she can create is so different. Because Claire can look inside put her hands on someone's ill body and know what she has to do to create wellness in that body, whether it's through surgery or medicine, etc. So I wonder. I think it's fascinating. Next week, we're going to be going over chapters 54, 55, and 56. It's very exciting. We're heading down to the home stretch. Will Roger get away from the Mohawk? Dun, dun, dun. That's the big question. How are they going to do it? Is the whiskey enough? What about the extra trinkets? There's probably going to be a hitch in their plan, just a little one, just because there always is a hitch in their plan, no matter what they try. So I find it interesting in the beginning of how the time looked very confusing. And we started out with Roger in October, but we were likely in, November. It had been a month since they left the ridge and got to the Tuscarora village. And they had reached the Mohawk village by February. So I'm trying to figure out these time frames here. So it probably only took a couple of weeks for them to get from the ridge, maybe 3 weeks from the ridge down to River Run. So that would have been, they arrived at River Run when Roger was starting out or ending his journey, like when he was getting where he was supposed to be. So they had left not long after Roger, it seems like. Maybe had been a little time, not too long, between the time he got snatched up and given to the Tuscarora. Okay, then they traveled from River Run in December, had gone to the Tuscaroran village, and so that probably had only been, that had only been a month. Wow, it's confusing. Sometimes the way she writes time, I'm like, what are we doing? So it probably took a couple of weeks to get to the Tuscarora village. Maybe 3 weeks-ish, because Claire said it would take 6 total. Yeah, I can't do the math on this. If any of you did the math, let me know, because I can't quite make it work in my head. So hopefully they'll be back. If it's February, for everybody now, where we're at in the story, she's 6 months pregnant, mid-February. And now they need to make it all the way from the north in the dead of winter to get back down to River Run. So that's a pretty long journey. Hopefully they'll be back by May or April. Mid-February, mid-March, mid-April. Yeah, maybe by mid-April. I don't know. We're going to see. Because I know something's coming up around what would be like the Beltane time period. So yeah, it's going to take him a couple of months to get even remotely back close, if they can. So anyhow, so I appreciate you greatly, and please share the podcast and go to the Facebook page, which is A Dram of Outlander, but also go and join the group. It's A Dram of Outlander under groups on Facebook, and you have to ask to join. There are 3 simple questions to make sure you are not a bot or a troll and you are a real person. I'm actually looking for a couple of administrators or maybe even moderators for the group to help me run it and to keep it, I don't know, fun and fancy-free and moving and enjoyable. On Twitter and Instagram, it's Dram of Outlander without the A in the front. And hey, if you like what I'm doing, you can help financially support the podcast. I need you. You can go to patreon.com/adramofOutlander and do a monthly offering for as little as $1 a month. Every penny counts. I do all of this myself and pay for it myself. I appreciate the small amount of donations that I do get. And if you want to do a one-time offering, that's great. The last one-time offering we got from Kelly, that helped subsidize the Denver Comic-Con panel and the after party. So again, thank you. And like every $1, I was able to buy new headphones. And one prior to that paid for basically the year of the website. So you guys are the best. It does absolutely help. Every single penny or every $1. The other thing that you can do that really helps and takes you just mere minutes is to go to Apple Podcast and go in and do a review. Every 5-star review helps bring people to me, helps listeners find A Dram of Outlander. And you can also go to Google Play or Spotify, Stitcher, and also leave reviews. They all matter. They all count. And I appreciate you for doing it. That's the way. And that's it. We're done for this week. And I hope you have a fantastic week. And we don't have a whole lot left. We're winding down. We've passed the 6-month mark. And we're going to do a quick read along afterward. One of the short stories or the novellas. Just to keep us on task until season 4 comes out, which we're all really excited about. And if any of you are going to the Outlander conventions, hey, let me know. And if you want to post pictures, if you want to do any write-ups for me, that would be incredible. I'm always looking for people who are able to travel and do all the fun things to contribute. So if you want to be a contributor to A Dram of Outlander, let me know, 719-425-9444 or contact@adramofoutlander.com. And I would love for you to be a contributor to the blog or do a little video or do a short recording. It's up to you. So, thanks so much. And until next time, slán je va.